Did you ever love someone so deeply that you started planning forever, only to find out they were already building their future with someone else? What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most was secretly plotting your downfall while smiling at you across the dinner table? Would you walk away quietly, or would you turn their dream into the stage for their biggest nightmare? My name is Callum Dray. I built my company from nothing but grit and sleepless nights. I had everything I wanted: success, recognition, and someone I believed was my future, Selene Thorne. Yeah, she wasn't just my girlfriend, she was my partner in every sense. We grew the business together, laughed through failures, and celebrated wins as if we had conquered the world. I had the ring, I had the speech, I had the moment planned. But what I didn't have was the truth. What Selene didn't know was that I had already begun to suspect. The missed calls, the strange late-night meetings, the guarded glances when she thought I wasn't looking, they weren't just signs, they were sirens. And as fate would have it, the man she chose to betray me with was someone I had once called a trusted partner. I could have exposed her right then. I could have confronted her, demanded answers, caused a scene, but something in me told me not to. That would be too easy, too short-lived, too forgettable. So I decided to wait. I decided to play the long game. I listened, I observed, I planned. And in the shadows of our shared life, I crafted something Selene would never see coming. I gave her everything she ever said she wanted, every wedding detail she had once described with stars in her eyes. The beachfront venue, the white lilies, the soft strings of a violin, the designer dress she pinned on her vision board. I gave her the dream, not out of love, but because I wanted her to taste it, to feel it, to believe in it. And then when she stood in front of her guests, smiling, heart racing, about to say the words that would seal her perfect future, someone else took the stage. Me, not to stop the wedding, but to finish it my way. This isn't a story of bitterness. This is a story of clarity, a story of betrayal, unmasked not with anger, but with precision. A story where the most powerful revenge wasn't screaming or violence, but giving someone the very thing they always wanted, only to show them how hollow it was, built on lies. You want to know how it all unfolded? How I turned the wedding of her dreams into a carefully crafted collapse of everything she stood on? Then listen closely, because this is the story of how I planned her dream wedding with someone else. New York City had a way of making you feel invincible. Between the towering glass buildings and the constant buzz of ambition in the air, it wrapped you in a rhythm that made you believe anything was possible. For me, Callum Dray, it had been the place where I'd built everything: my company, my career, and for a while I thought, my future with Selene Thorne. I met Selene 5 years ago at a conference for digital media innovators. She was magnetic even then. Is not just beautiful in a way that turned heads, but sharp, quick-witted, with a hunger in her eyes that mirrored my own. She wasn't just interested in the aesthetics or fluff. She had vision. When I brought her into my company as creative director, I thought I was making the smartest professional and personal decision of my life. We were a powerhouse duo. Her campaigns caught attention, and my strategy turned them into money. Investors loved our synergy. Clients loved the edge she brought to the table. And I loved her. Our lives meshed seamlessly. Late nights in the office turned into wine on the balcony of my penthouse. Brainstorming sessions became quiet conversations about the future, children, travel, legacy. I trusted her deeply, enough to bring her into every corner of my world: the boardroom, my family, my plans for the future. And when I began designing an engagement ring, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. There were small things, of course, moments where she would drift during meetings, a strange energy when she returned from off-site collaborations, a hesitation when I asked her about her day. But I chalked it up to pressure. We were running a fast-growing company in one of the most competitive cities in the world. Who wouldn't be stressed? Our biggest project yet came with a pitch to an influential investor, the kind of deal that could scale our media company into something global. Selene was meant to lead the creative for the campaign, while I handled the strategy and projections. We were perfect partners, or so I believed. But then came the day of the pitch. The client didn't sign. Not only that, he pulled out of all communications entirely. When my assistant followed up for feedback, the only note we got was that there were concerns about internal integrity. I was blindsided, furious, confused, and when I sat Selene down to ask if she knew anything at all, her answer was a bit too measured, her eyes a little too cold. That was the first time I let doubt in. I didn't want to believe it at first. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, that I was reading too much into it, but once doubt took root, it was impossible to ignore the signs that had been there all along, the sudden increase in business dinners that didn't include me, the way Selene's phone was always on silent, how she began dressing just a little differently when she wasn't at the office, more polished, more deliberate. There were whispers from colleagues I'd once brushed off, and strange moments in meetings when our senior staff would exchange glances I couldn't quite decode. Then came the moment that broke whatever illusion I had left. I found a message on her office computer. She'd left it unlocked just once while she went to grab a coffee. It was an email draft. Not yet sent, but damning. It was addressed to a name I recognized too well, Damian Rourke. He was one of our newest strategic partners, wealthy, flashy, arrogant, the kind of man who always seemed too slick to trust. I had reservations about him from the start, but Selene had insisted he was valuable for growth, and I let it slide. I let a lot of things slide. The email was flirtatious, laced with inside jokes, late-night references, and worst of all, a line that read, "We just have to wait until the board votes. Once that's done, he won't be able to touch us." That he was me. They were planning something, not just personal betrayal, but professional sabotage. I sat at her desk in silence, staring at the screen, the city buzzing just beyond the glass wall behind me. And in that moment, something in me fractured. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something colder, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I closed the laptop gently, stood up, and walked out of her office with a smile when she returned with her coffee. She kissed my cheek. I kissed hers back. I didn't say a word. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, watching the lights of the city flicker, planning. Not revenge, not yet, but something more surgical. I wasn't going to confront her with yelling or accusations that would only give her time to rewrite the story. No, I needed to understand everything. I needed truth, evidence, and time, and I would give her exactly what she thought she wanted until the very last moment when I would take it all away. That was the night Callum Dray, the man she thought she could play, began to disappear, and someone far more dangerous took his place. In the weeks that followed, I perfected the art of pretending. I kept our routines the same. I brought her morning coffee just the way she liked it. Soy milk, half sweet, no foam. I left sticky notes on her desk with little jokes only she would understand. I listened to her pitch ideas for the company's upcoming rebrand, smiling as she spoke about vision and alignment, knowing full well she was using those same buzzwords to charm Damian behind my back. She thought I was slipping. I could see it in her eyes, the subtle way she stopped trying as hard around me. She became less careful, less affectionate. Her words started losing warmth. Our shared apartment, once filled with laughter and ideas and music playing softly from the kitchen, now felt like a set, and she was reading from a half-forgotten script. I began assembling a small circle of people I could trust, people she wouldn't suspect. My head of cybersecurity, Julian, owed me more than a few favors. I didn't tell him everything, just that I suspected corporate espionage and needed discreet monitoring. He didn't ask questions. He set up tracking logs on Damian's email accounts, combed through internal communications, and pulled metadata from company devices. I recruited another quiet ally, Mia, a junior analyst who had once been mentored by Selene, but was now quietly being iced out. I asked her to help with data on our investment pitches, just a casual audit, I said. She was sharp and loyal, and soon enough, she came back with inconsistencies. Selene had been leaking internal documents to Damian, masked through a shell consultancy he happened to own. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Selene was setting me up to take the fall for a failed joint venture, while she and Damian positioned themselves to absorb the client and take the spotlight. I had enough to confront her, to go to the board, even to involve legal counsel. But I didn't, because I had a better idea. Instead of ending it there, I would let it all continue. I'd feed it. I'd escalate it. I would let her believe she was winning. So I started to drift. Emotionally, physically. I canceled dinners. I pulled out of meetings she expected me to attend. I let her think I was distracted, maybe even disillusioned with her. I fed the illusion that she was outgrowing me. She began dressing up again, not for me, but for him. She started spending more nights away on business. I never questioned her. I told her I trusted her, with a smile that never quite reached my eyes. And then I brought in Vivian Kale. Vivian wasn't just a new investor. She was sharp, poised, and utterly disarming. She had the effortless elegance that Selene secretly envied but could never fully emulate. I introduced them casually during a pitch meeting. I watched Selene's mask falter just slightly when Vivian spoke, articulate, confident, magnetic. It didn't take long for Selene to start bumping into Vivian at company mixers, charity events, investor briefings. I arranged every one of those meetings. I placed them like chess pieces. Selene didn't even realize she was stepping into the trap willingly. One night, Selene came home glowing like she used to. She told me about a fascinating conversation with Vivian, how aligned their visions were, how refreshing it was to talk to someone who got it. She didn't know Vivian and I had been planning this entire operation over espresso and legal briefings for weeks. Vivian played it flawlessly, flirtatious but distant, just enough to make Selene lean in. She let Selene initiate every step of their blooming connection. The chemistry was undeniable, even if one side of it was manufactured. Selene, thinking she was trading up, began confiding in Vivian about frustrations at work, about me. She said she felt stuck, that I didn't challenge her anymore, that Damien was too risky, and maybe she'd made a mistake. That was when we knew the hook was in. Vivian floated the idea of a destination wedding, a fresh start, a private affair. Selene lit up. She spoke about white orchids and cliffside vows and silk gowns. Vivian said she'd think about it. And I said I'd handle everything, planning, budget, logistics. After all, I was just the ex, the boring executive she'd outgrown. Why not let me play the helpful friend? In her eyes, I was a ghost of a man and, an old flame burned out. She didn't know I was building her dream just to burn it down. The irony was that Selene believed she was in control, that she had outmaneuvered me, traded me in, and upgraded her future with ease. Every time she looked at Vivian, I saw it in her face, that soft, hungry gaze that screamed possession. She wanted Vivian not just as a partner, but as a prize. To win her would mean defeating me, replacing me, erasing me. That, I think, was her real fantasy. I kept quiet as the plans moved forward. We agreed on the Hamptons for the venue, secluded, upscale, just the right amount of grandeur to match Selene's curated aesthetic. Ivory linens, crystal chandeliers, a live quartet, every detail tailored to the fantasy she'd once described to me in whispers. Something timeless, she had said once, lying beside me in bed, somewhere coastal with the sound of waves while I say, I do. I gave her that. Every single thing. The planning was extensive, meticulous, and emotionally exhausting. I worked with Vivian behind the scenes to ensure every vendor, every photographer, every guest on the list was handpicked, not for sentiment, but for exposure. The wedding wouldn't just be a declaration of love, it would be a spectacle, a stage, and Selene was center stage. She walked through the process as if reborn, radiant, impatient, alive in a way she hadn't been in months. She started treating me like a helpful assistant, delegating, dismissing, half thanking. It didn't bother me. I wanted her to underestimate me. Every time she threw another glance across the room at Vivian, she believed she was winning. She believed she had taken what she deserved. But the cracks were already showing. Vivian, for her part, was immaculate. She played the part of the mysterious high-value partner to perfection. Aloof but affectionate, she never quite confirmed anything, not her feelings, not her plans, just let Selene assume. Vivian was the mirror Selene wanted to see herself reflected in. Power, elegance, escape. And Selene leaned into it like an actress addicted to her own role. Meanwhile, I continued feeding Vivian details about Selene, not just her habits and preferences, but the uglier truths she'd hidden even from herself. Her insecurities, her manipulations, her need to always appear untouchable. We laced those truths into Vivian's responses, subtly turning the screws. Selene thought she was seducing. In reality, she was unraveling. The week before the wedding, Selene invited me to lunch. She wore a white dress, casual but symbolic, and smiled across the table like we were old friends. She told me how grateful she was for my support, how things had worked out for the best, how happy she was that we could still work together. I nodded, smiled, clinked glasses. Inside, I felt nothing, not anger, not grief, just clarity. The final turn of the screw. That night, I sent the final cut of the video to Vivian, a compilation of footage pulled from over 8 months of surveillance, Selene's meetings with Damien, their private dinners, her confession to Vivian about manipulating company assets. Everything time-stamped, clean, undeniable, the footage from the hidden camera in the bracelet I had given her, the one she wore proudly in every meeting, every late-night tryst. Vivian texted me back 3 words, "Showtime is ready." And it was. The rehearsal dinner was a masterclass in deception. Everything looked perfect. Selene glided from table to table in her soft beige gown, effortlessly charming every guest. Vivian played the perfect partner, attentive but reserved, the kind that draws people in just by standing still. Selene couldn't stop smiling. She was glowing, convinced that she had stepped into the life she always believed she deserved. No one noticed how tightly Vivian gripped her champagne glass when Selene leaned in too close, or how I stood in the corner, seemingly forgotten, but observing every angle, every toast, every lie. The investors we'd invited, men and women who'd once funded our company, all smiled politely. Some of them had seen the footage already. Others had heard whispers, but none of them suspected what was coming. That was the beauty of it. No one truly believes the storm is real until it hits. Selene gave a speech, a soft, tearful monologue about love, fate, and how sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you didn't know you needed. I almost laughed. Vivian raised her glass. So did I. The final day came like clockwork. Morning sun over the coast, makeup artists arriving, Selene in a white silk robe, surrounded by laughter and perfume and curated chaos. Vivian arrived later, dressed in slate gray, a calm contrast to the bridal storm around her. I spent the day in the control room, not metaphorically, but literally. I had rented out a small operations booth behind the venue's AV setup, where my tech crew had full access to the projector, the sound, the lights. One of my closest friends, someone Selene never bothered to acknowledge, sat beside me, watching the cue list. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. I didn't look away from the screen. She designed this ending herself. The guests began arriving by late afternoon. Elegant, wealthy, curated, the kind of people Selene had always wanted to impress. I watched her greet them one by one, glowing like a queen in her temporary kingdom, and all the while the footage sat loaded in the queue, ready to interrupt the ceremony with one touch. At sunset, the music began. Selene walked down the aisle with her father, veil lifted, face radiant. Vivian waited at the altar, composed and unreadable. The officiant began speaking, but I could hardly hear him. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, I felt strangely calm. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was closure. Selene began her vows, voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. Then the officiant turned to Vivian. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned toward the guests and stepped back. That was the cue. My tech signaled. I pressed the key. The screen behind them flickered to life. The opening shot. Selene, in the same white silk robe, whispering into her phone, calling someone darling. Then another, her hand reaching across a table to grasp Damien's. Then another, a time-stamped moment, clearly during working hours, when she handed him confidential files and whispered, "He'll never see this coming." The room went silent. And then, gasps. Selene turned, her face drained of color. Vivian stepped forward, her voice calm and low. "You didn't just betray Callum. You betrayed everyone who ever trusted you." And with that, she stepped off the altar and walked away. Selene stood frozen at the altar, the veil trembling in her hands. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked truly lost, not dramatic, not performative, but genuinely undone. The room, packed with friends, colleagues, investors, and extended family, watched in a hush so heavy it felt like gravity itself had thickened. No one rushed to her side. No one whispered comfort. Even her father looked away, jaw tight. On the projection screen behind her, the final video clip played, a compilation of meetings between Selene and Damien at my company's offices. Zoomed-in footage from the discrete cameras embedded in her office mirror, her laptop, and yes, even the charm bracelet I'd gifted her. She had never suspected a thing. Every secret deal, every whisper, every moment she let her mask slip. I had it all. She had once told me, "Transparency is the foundation of trust." I couldn't agree more. The screen went dark. A beat of silence, then the lights returned to their soft glow, and the officiant quietly stepped off the stage. It was over. The wedding was over. I walked down the center aisle past the stunned guests toward Selene. She turned to me with wide, glassy eyes. Her lips moved, maybe to explain, maybe to beg. I didn't give her the chance. I simply said, "This was your dream, wasn't it? The beach, the flowers, the crowd. I just made it come true." She opened her mouth again, but I was already turning. I walked back through the crowd, Vivian waiting for me at the back, calm as ever. As I reached her, she handed me a simple envelope. "A goodbye note?" I asked. "Just a receipt," she said, with a faint smile. We left together, the doors swinging shut behind us as Selene collapsed into the silence of her own shattered fantasy. By the next morning, the footage had been leaked online, not by me, but by someone in the crowd. Perhaps an investor who'd had enough of Selene's games, perhaps a friend who wanted to make sure the truth was seen. Either way, the videos went viral within hours. Headlines exploded across media blogs and tech forums. Wedding day meltdown, creative director exposed in front of entire industry. Within a week, Selene was forced to resign from the company. Damien, already in the crosshairs of a brewing SEC investigation, vanished from the scene. And me? I didn't gloat, I didn't post. I didn't even return the calls from the press. I went back to work, quiet, focused. Vivian stayed on, not as a romantic partner, and that was never our intention, but as a senior advisor, a voice of clarity and calm. We never needed to speak of what we did. It had worked, and that was enough. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't just confront Selene privately. Why go to such lengths? Why humiliate her? The answer is simple. She built her life on illusions. I just handed her a mirror and let her tear it all down herself. That's the thing about betrayal. It thrives in darkness, but once you flip on the lights, no one looks quite the same again. It started with a silence that wasn't ours. Selene had always filled our apartment with sound. Her laughter in the mornings, her favorite music playing low while she cooked, the soft hum of her voice when she talked to herself. But after that weekend, something shifted. The silences between us weren't comfortable anymore. They were sharp-edged, intentional. And that's when I knew she wasn't just distracted, she was hiding something. I didn't confront her, I didn't accuse, I watched. The first thing I did was change the passwords on our shared accounts. Emails, business tools, calendars. I wanted to see what she would do when the small windows she thought were private started closing, and predictably, she panicked. I saw her one night on the balcony, pacing with her phone, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear the words, but her tone said enough. Desperation, not fear of being caught, but of losing something or someone. And thus, that was when I contacted Vivian. She had joined as a potential investor a few months back, and we'd had only a few professional interactions, but I remembered how sharp she was, cool, observant, effortlessly poised. I invited her to lunch, pitched it as a follow-up on her interest in the company. She accepted. Over coffee, I told her everything. Not the emotional wreckage. I didn't need pity, just the facts. Selene's affair with a known competitor, the suspicious meetings, the changes in behavior. I showed her a few screenshots from the security logs. Selene had forwarded files she had no business touching. Vivian didn't flinch. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "What do you want to do about it?" I want to give her exactly what she wants, I said. A dream wedding, the kind she always talked about. The perfect man, the fairy tale, and then I want her to see what it costs to build that in lies. Vivian's smile was slow and calculating. I'm in. We began building the stage. I had the IT team set up secure logging on Selene's work devices. Nothing invasive, just enough to track documents she accessed and who she shared them with. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator, not the trench coat type. This one specialized in digital forensics. Within days, I had a drive full of data, phone records, text messages, and discreet photos of Selene and Damien, yes, that was his name, at restaurants, hotels, and even a weekend getaway upstate she claimed was a wellness retreat. Every image burned, but I didn't react, not outwardly. I cataloged them, time-stamped them, and created a folder labeled wedding gift. I also started journaling everything, every call, every moment she lied to my face, every shift in tone. I wanted a full chronology of her deceit, not because I needed to remember, but because I needed to understand. I needed to make sure when the time came, I wouldn't hesitate. Vivian and I kept meeting under the guise of investor talks. I watched as Selene grew more curious about her. At first, she was cold, but over time, I noticed her expression shift when Vivian entered the room. There was admiration, attraction even. She didn't know Vivian was already mine, in loyalty, if not in love. Selene thought she was winning. She had no idea she was walking into a story someone else had already written. The transformation in Selene was subtle at first. More attention to her hair, a sharper wardrobe, the flirtatious lilt in her voice when Vivian happened to be around. She thought she was the one making moves, steering the narrative, but Vivian knew exactly how to play her, then aloof, amused, intrigued, but just out of reach. It was like watching a snake coil around itself, unaware it had already swallowed the bait. Meanwhile, I continued building the foundation of my plan. I wasn't going to expose Selene through confrontation. I wanted her to walk willingly into the life she thought she'd manipulated into existence, and then watch it crumble beneath her feet. So I played the distance. I started pulling away emotionally, just enough for her to feel a shift, but not enough to alarm her. I'd come home late and say I was at the office when in fact I was meeting with venue coordinators, florists, string quartets. I was designing her perfect wedding, the one she had described to me years ago, on a rooftop overlooking the city, under fairy lights and too much wine. Beachside, minimalist but elegant, white lilies, barefoot vows, no crowd, just people who matter. I gave her all of it. I contacted a resort in Montauk and reserved a private estate with a panoramic ocean view. I worked with a designer to create the gown she had once shown me in a bridal magazine, laughing nervously. I had every detail custom made, each arrangement, each invitation, each table name. It was her dream, down to the last petal. Vivian coordinated the guest list. I told her to include names that mattered. Former colleagues, mutual friends, investors, Selene's estranged father, people whose judgment she feared. The idea was simple. Let her believe she was stepping into the best moment of her life, surrounded by the people she most wanted to impress. And Damien, he was being handled too. Turns out, the man she had risked everything for had his own secrets. The investigator uncovered that Damien was under quiet investigation for insider trading, leveraging information he'd extracted from Selene. That explained why he had grown distant from her recently. He wasn't in love. He was using her. And she, naive, ambitious, desperate for validation, believed she was the one in control. I had a decision to make. Expose Damien too, or let him destroy himself. I chose the latter, one less thread to pull. As the weeks passed, Selene seemed happier, more present. She started cooking again, humming old songs. She talked about new beginnings, about how things felt more aligned now. She was preparing to leave me, but I made it easy for her. I encouraged her. I feigned confusion, then acceptance. I said I want her to be happy. She never said the words, but I saw it in her eyes. She thought she had outgrown me. The final step was the engagement, a staged moment between Selene and Vivian, set in motion after a company gala with champagne and ocean air and the illusion of spontaneity. Vivian slid the ring on Selene's finger, and Selene, gleaming with pride, completely unaware, called it fate. Fate. How poetic. And so, the countdown began. 47 days until the wedding. 47 days until she realized she wasn't the bride of her dreams, but the star of her own downfall. Vivian kept me updated on everything. She played her role with graceful precision, never too eager, always just enough warmth to keep Selene hooked. The two of them became a spectacle in the office, whispered about in corridors, but never overtly questioned. Selene looked radiant, the kind of glow people get when they believe they've won. And in a way, she had. She had managed to replace me with someone she believed was an upgrade, someone powerful, worldly, desirable. But it was an illusion carefully sculpted by the very man she thought she had escaped. Behind the scenes, Vivian and I orchestrated every aspect of the ceremony. She handled the emotional manipulation, I handled logistics. We met weekly at a small cafe outside the city where no one knew us, poring over seating charts, music arrangements, and the perfect moment to deliver the blow. The bracelet came next. It was a custom piece, minimalist, elegant, exactly Celine's taste. It was also fitted with a micro camera. I gave it to her as a gift, presented as a gesture of letting go and moving on. She wore it every day after that proudly. She had no idea she was filming herself the entire time. Conversations with Damien, secret calls, moments of intimacy, and worst of all, admissions. In one recording, she laughed and told Damien, "He thinks I still love him. Poor Callum. He'll be fine, though. He always lands on his feet." That one line sealed it. I compiled the footage discreetly, edited it with the help of a trusted media contact. A short reel, 5 minutes long, nothing sensational, just the truth, stripped of commentary. Her words, her face, her actions. I decided to play it during the vows. Every great performance deserved a final act. This one would be set under an open sky with the ocean as our witness, and the people Selene respected most watching it all unfold. Vivian booked a discreet projection team. We arranged for the final screen to be hidden beneath a floral arch, rigged to drop down with the push of a button. The vows would begin as normal. Then the screen would lower, and Selene's perfect world would fall apart. But the most important piece wasn't the video or the setting, it was the letter, a handwritten note sealed in an envelope embossed with gold. I kept it in a drawer, rewriting it again and again, trying to balance emotion with clarity. It wasn't about bitterness, it was about closure. I wrote, "This was your dream. I just made it come true. You wanted someone who could give you everything. I gave you truth. I hope you can live with it. Goodbye." The irony was almost cruel in its symmetry. She had envisioned a future built on deception, and I had built one for her, layered with it, decorated in it, then shattered by it. As the final days approached, I felt calm. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, just certainty, the kind that comes when you know you've done everything possible, and now all that's left is to watch. She walked toward the trap with stars in her eyes and betrayal in her veins. I would greet her at the altar, not as her groom, not as her past, but as the reckoning she never saw coming, and this time I wouldn't be the one left behind. The sunlight filtered through the sheer white curtains of the beachside villa, casting a golden hue on the bridal suite. The air buzzed with the quiet hum of violinists tuning their instruments outside, waves crashing softly beyond the arched windows. Selene stood before a full-length mirror, draped in a flowing ivory gown that hugged her waist and spilled like silk over the marble floor. Her lips curved in a slow, self-satisfied smile. "This is it," she whispered to her reflection. Finally, every detail was perfect, exactly as she'd always fantasized. The ceremony on the terrace, surrounded by white lilies and peonies, violins playing her favorite Vivaldi concerto, the ocean behind her like a moving painting, and Vivienne, charming, charismatic, wildly successful, was waiting at the altar. She had convinced herself this was the culmination of every decision she'd made, every risk she'd taken. She had traded up, or so she believed. What she didn't know was that today wasn't her fairy tale. It was Callum's masterpiece. Outside, guests were seated in rows of white chairs on the manicured lawn. Among them were influential investors, colleagues, old friends, some of whom Selene hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone important was here. Everyone who had ever mattered to her career, her image, her ambition, and they were all about to witness what came next. Vivian waited at the altar, serene as ever in a pale gray suit. Her smile was composed, almost affectionate, but her eyes flickered toward the wedding planner stationed near the sound booth. A subtle nod. The plan was unfolding exactly on time. Back inside, Selene adjusted her veil, gave herself one last approving glance, and stepped out onto the deck with her bridesmaids trailing behind. Applause and camera shutters greeted her. She walked slowly down the aisle, eyes locked on Vivian. As she reached the altar, the officiant gave a brief welcome. The ceremony was short by design. Selene had insisted on skipping anything boring or traditional. They moved quickly to the vows. Vivian went first, delivering lines she and Callum had scripted with surgical precision, words sweet enough to sound real, yet hollow upon closer inspection. Then it was Selene's turn. She took Vivian's hands and began. "I never thought I'd find someone who saw me for who I truly am," she started, her voice rich with emotion projecting to the crowd. Halfway through her speech, just as she said, "With you, I can be my most honest self," a loud chime echoed through the speakers. The officiant blinked, confused. Vivian released Selene's hands and took a small step back. Selene froze. A familiar voice came through the sound system, Callum's voice. "Honesty," he said calmly. "That's a beautiful word, Selene. I wonder if it still means anything to you." Gasps rippled through the guests. Selene turned in stunned confusion. Then she saw him, standing just behind the final row of chairs, holding a microphone. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, Callum walked slowly down the aisle toward the altar, all eyes shifting between him and the bride. Selene's face turned white. "Callum," she breathed, her voice nearly inaudible. "Don't stop the ceremony on my account," he said, stopping a few feet from her. "I just thought the guests should hear a few words from me. After all, I paid for this wedding." More gasps. Whispers broke out. Cameras turned. Selene opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Vivian stood beside her like a statue, hands folded, eyes calm. Callum's smile was thin. "Shall we show them?" he asked quietly. Then he raised his hand and signaled. A screen behind the altar lit up. The music stopped, and the first video began to play. The screen behind the altar flickered to life, and an uneasy hush fell over the guests. The first clip was grainy but clear, security footage from a luxury hotel lobby. Selene walked in, dressed in a sleek black coat, laughing with a man whose face had been blurred, but his hand slipped too easily around her waist for there to be any doubt. Then came more clips, short, silent bursts of surveillance, elevator rides, hallway whispers, lingering kisses behind glass doors. Her betrayal projected larger than life, on the very stage she had chosen for her fairy tale ending. Selene's hands trembled at her sides, her lips parted in horror, eyes darting from screen to crowd. She recognized the setting, the movements, every moment, and now everyone else did too. The final clip was the most damning. It was a voice recording, played loud and clear through the speakers. "I just don't see Callum making it past the next quarter," Selene said in the recording, her voice sharp and calculated. "Once that deal tanks, the board will shift. And when it does, I'll already be aligned with someone stronger." A pause. "I'm not here for love, okay? I'm here to win." The silence afterward was deafening. Callum stood still, his face impassive. Vivian hadn't moved, though her gaze had hardened just slightly. The guests began to murmur. A few glanced around awkwardly. Some looked outright disgusted. Selene looked like she might collapse. "You planned this," she finally whispered, almost a plea. Callum tilted his head. "I gave you exactly what you wanted, your dream wedding, your perfect moment." He turned to the guests. "Selene always said she wanted a wedding by the sea, white flowers, violins, tailored suits, every detail perfect. So I made sure she had it all." His voice was steady, deliberate. But dreams built on lies have a way of collapsing, especially when everyone's watching. Selene stepped toward him, her voice desperate. "Callum, wait, this isn't fair. You don't understand." He held up a hand. "I understand more than you think." He looked around at the stunned faces in the crowd, investors who now saw the truth behind Selene's calculated charm, friends who realized they'd been manipulated, employees whose trust had been betrayed. His gaze returned to Selene. "You didn't just betray me. You weaponized my company, my relationships, my future. So no, I didn't come here to win you back. I came to end the story." Vivian stepped forward now, placing a firm but gentle hand on Selene's arm. "I think that's enough. she said quietly. Selene yanked her arm away, her voice breaking. You were in on this? Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. From the very beginning. Selene looked like she'd been slapped. Her eyes darted between them, realization hitting her like a tidal wave. The man she'd loved was never replaced. He had orchestrated it all. Callum took one final look at her. I hope someday you find what you were looking for, Selene, but it won't be here. He turned without another word and walked back down the aisle, leaving her on the altar, surrounded by silence and the crumbling illusion of everything she thought she'd built. Behind her, the sea kept crashing, indifferent, eternal. Selene stood frozen beneath the archway, white petals still fluttering around her like ash after a fire. No one applauded. No one spoke. Her perfect audience had become a tribunal. Guests averted their eyes. Some exchanged uncomfortable whispers. Others were already reaching for their phones. Whether to leave quietly or to relay the scandal to someone else, Callum didn't care. Vivian remained by Selene's side for a moment longer, then took a step back, folding her hands calmly. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak. Her presence was enough. Steady, grounded, deliberate. A final punctuation mark to a sentence that had been years in the making. Selene's voice cracked as she turned to her. You never loved me? Vivian raised an eyebrow. You never asked if I did. You just assumed I was the upgrade. Selene blinked, stunned into silence. Then came the whispers. A few bold guests began to leave their seats. One of Callum's senior investors clapped him on the shoulder as he passed. Another nodded with approval, murmuring, elegant execution. In a way, Callum hadn't needed to say much. The truth had spoken for itself, unedited, undeniable, and that was always the plan. He lingered only a moment longer, watching as Selene slowly turned in place, eyes sweeping the crowd like a stranded actress in a play she no longer understood. The cameras, the stage, the guests, all elements she had once tried to choreograph, were now her undoing. Someone handed her a shawl. Another offered to help her off the stage. She shook them off, lips trembling, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Callum didn't stay to see how she would exit. That wasn't his concern anymore. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the venue in gold. The waves rolled against the shore like applause from a distant, indifferent world. Callum stepped into the light, his step slow but certain. Vivian joined him a few moments later. They didn't speak immediately. They didn't need to. She finally broke the silence. Do you feel better? He thought about it. I feel done. She nodded. Then it was worth it. Callum turned to her. You played your part perfectly. Vivian smirked. I was always better on stage than in real life. He let out a breath, the first deep, full breath he'd taken in months. They walked down the path toward the car waiting at the edge of the cliffs. The wind caught the edge of his suit jacket and pulled at her loose curls. Behind them, the venue was slowly unraveling, staff scrambling, guests dispersing, the chaos of a celebration that had never really been real. But Callum wasn't looking back. As he opened the car door, Vivian handed him a small envelope. What's this? He asked. A letter. For her. You said you'd write it. He stared at it. Inside was a single note, handwritten, no signature. This was your dream. I just made it come true. He folded it and handed it back. Can you give it to her? Vivian nodded. Of course. Callum slid into the car, the door closing with a soft click. As it pulled away, he looked out at the ocean. The same ocean Selene had once dreamed of as the backdrop to a life that was never hers to keep. This wasn't revenge. This was release. The news of the wedding fiasco spread like a ripple across the city's startup and media circles. Within 24 hours, the video had made its way to niche industry forums. Within 72, it was on mainstream gossip blogs. Within a week, Selene Thorne's name had become synonymous with scandal, not because she cheated, but because she'd been outplayed so thoroughly by the man she thought she'd already discarded. Callum didn't speak to the press. He didn't release a statement. He let the silence grow around him like armor. His company, Dray Media, had a brief flare-up of public attention. Curious investors, sympathetic clients, a few critical takes on whether the exposure had been ethical. But as the noise settled, something else became clear. The people who had been in that room respected him more now than they ever had before, not for being vindictive, but for being strategic, poised, and above all, quietly dignified. Selene, on the other hand, disappeared. First, she vanished from social media, accounts deactivated, photos scrubbed. Then, from the office, she hadn't returned to Dray Media, and there was no resignation letter. HR received an email from her personal account 2 days after the wedding, stating that she was taking an indefinite leave of absence to recover emotionally from a deeply traumatic experience. Callum approved the leave without comment, but privately, he knew she wouldn't come back. She couldn't. Not to the place where every corridor reminded her of her downfall, where every team member had seen the truth unfold live in designer dresses and custom lighting. He never wanted to destroy her. He only wanted her to face herself, stripped of illusions. As for Vivian, she handled the aftermath with the same grace she'd carried through the entire performance. She gave no interviews, made no jokes, posted no cryptic photos. They met once a week later in a quiet cafe in Soho. The mood was different now. No scheming, no codes, just coffee and a shared knowing. "I've had 6 offers to write about it," she said casually, stirring her drink. "1 podcast, 3 documentaries, and someone wants to make a limited series." Callum chuckled. "Are you considering it?" "I told them no, it's not my story to sell." He looked at her, genuinely grateful. "Thank you." She tilted her head. "You don't want to capitalize on it?" "It was never about that. I wanted to take my story back, and now I have." Vivian nodded. "Then you did it right." They parted with a handshake. Not lovers, not partners in crime, just 2 people who understood the weight of betrayal and the quiet strength it took to rise above it. That night, Callum returned home, the apartment he once shared with Selene, now stripped of her belongings. The space felt hollow, but clean. He poured a glass of whiskey, stepped out onto the balcony, and watched the city pulse below. He thought about all the things he didn't say at that wedding, the rage he buried, the nights he lay awake wondering if he wasn't enough, the hours spent watching Selene fall in love with someone who had promised her shortcuts. But mostly, he thought about how it ended, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with truth dressed in silk and roses standing under fairy lights. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, peace. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at Callum's office. No return address, no handwriting, just a single cream-colored card inside. It was a wedding invitation, or rather, a mock one. On the front, in gilded cursive, it read, "Selene Thorne cordially regrets the ruin of her own fairy tale." Inside, only one sentence was scrawled in black ink. "You destroyed me." Callum read it once, then again. His lips curled, not in satisfaction, but in something closer to sadness. She still didn't get it. He hadn't destroyed her. She had done that long before he ever stepped onto that stage. What he did was give the world a mirror. She just didn't like the reflection. Still, it lingered with him longer than he expected. That sentence, it was so final, so small, and yet it carried the entire weight of her downfall. Maybe she had loved him once. Maybe part of her still did. But she had loved herself more. And when the two came into conflict, it wasn't even a competition. He placed the card into a drawer along with the bracelet, the same one that had captured the secret footage. He didn't need either of them anymore. They had served their purpose. He closed the drawer, closed that chapter. A few days after that, Callum found himself on the roof of the Dray Media building. Sunset bled into the glass skyline, casting gold across the steel. He had started doing this lately, coming up here to think. Not brood, not plot, just be. Vivian joined him unannounced. She handed him a bottle of water, not whiskey this time. "You look lighter," she said. "I am." "You still think about her?" He nodded. "But it's different now. It's not anger, not even betrayal. Just memory." She sat beside him. "That's how you know it's over." Callum turned to her. "Why did you really help me?" Vivian looked out at the sky. "Because I saw myself in you, not the version that had been cheated on, but the version that refused to let bitterness win." "You think I won?" I think you stayed human, and that's rarer than revenge." There was a long silence between them, one not filled with tension or expectation, just presence. He finally asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we met differently?" Vivian smiled softly. "I think about that, but I also think maybe this was exactly how we were meant to meet." They didn't kiss. They didn't make promises. But when they stood up to leave, they walked together, not apart. Months passed. Selene disappeared from the professional world. Her LinkedIn vanished, her email bounced back undelivered, and her name never came up in circles where it used to dominate. Rumors floated about a breakdown, about a retreat to Europe, about lawsuits quietly settled and severance stripped. But Callum didn't pursue them. He had no interest in what came after. That wasn't his burden to carry anymore. Dray Media, on the other hand, thrived. Investors' renewed confidence, public goodwill skyrocketed, and internally, the culture shifted. Loyalty became a currency again, not clout. Vivian took a seat on the board, not as a favor, but because she'd earned it. She and Callum built something solid, not just in business, but in trust. One afternoon, while clearing his old email archives, Callum stumbled on a forgotten draft. It was a proposal. A year ago, he had been planning a joint project with Selene, a creative platform combining art, tech, and storytelling. It had ambition, vision, and both of their names in the header. He stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without opening. Some stories didn't deserve a rewrite. One weekend, Callum visited the seaside town where he'd grown up. He wandered the boardwalk, ate street food from a stall he hadn't touched in years, and watched children chase kites in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, his mind didn't race. It just rested. As he sat by the railing overlooking the ocean, an old couple nearby were dancing. No music, no rhythm, just laughter. It was such an ordinary, beautiful moment. He smiled to himself. That, he realized, was the kind of love he believed in. Not the curated, calculated kind, but the quiet, enduring type. The one that didn't require grand gestures to exist. The one you built day by day, without cameras or crowds. On his way back, he stopped at a flower shop and bought a single white lily. He didn't send it to anyone. He just placed it on the windowsill of his apartment next to the final note he had written, but never delivered. To Selene, it read, "This was your dream. I just made it come true, and now I'll go live mine." He never sent it. He never needed to. The closure wasn't in what she received. It was in what he finally let go. And with that, Callum Dray walked forward, not as a man who had been betrayed, but as one who had rebuilt himself from the ashes of someone else's lies, stronger, wiser, and free.